Which matchups should we be targeting and which should we be avoiding for fantasy football in week 2? We're talking about that in today's video. Give us a like and subscribe. We put out content all year, almost every day of the week. Appreciate your support. If you're new to the channel, you didn't see this video last week, we made one for week 1. We talked about 16 players with good matchups, 12 with bad matchups, and we actually hit on about 65% of those. 65% of the good or bad matchups ended up being good or bad performances from those players. Now, are we going to hit on all of them? Of course not. If we're hitting at 65%, that's awesome. And again, these are more players that are kind of fringe starters. Obviously, if Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall or CeeDee Lamb have a bad matchup, you're still going to start them. So we're not talking about those players. We're talking about more fringe starters, and maybe you can use this as a tiebreaker. Are we going to be right all the time? But if we hit on a 65% clip, that is awesome. First up on my good list here is Mr. Aaron Rodgers. Now, Aaron Rodgers was on this list last week for a bad matchup, and it played out that way. When we're looking at the quarterbacks and we're looking at bad or good matchups, we're looking at the offensive line versus the defensive line. So the quarterback's offensive line versus the defensive line that they're facing. And to me, Aaron Rodgers and the Jets have a relatively good matchup against the Titans and their defensive line. I think we see kind of what we're expecting to see from Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Last week, it was tough. You're playing the 49ers in San Francisco. You know, Aaron Rodgers didn't really play any preseason at all. This was kind of a preseason game in terms of getting up to game speed. I expect a pretty big bounce back here for them. So I expect good things from Rodgers, from Garrett Wilson, from Breece Hall. And I think Rodgers can be a low-end QB1 here this week, and I wouldn't be surprised. I know Caleb Williams didn't look great against Tennessee, and I do think Tennessee's defense has improved. But I think if they can provide Aaron Rodgers some protection, he's going to be able to carve them up. If they can't, there's going to be some trouble here, right? There's going to be some trouble. So that is my choice for my first good matchup. Geno Smith is my next one here. He was on this list last week as well as a team and a quarterback that I wanted to target. Geno Smith was QB7. QB7 in last week's performance. Now, a lot of it did come on the ground. I think he had 10 points of that coming on the ground, rushing for 40 yards, 30 yards and a touchdown maybe. If he gets back to that, I mean, he's going to be a good start all year long. But I do think this matchup against for Geno Smith is going to be a pretty good one against the Patriots. I think their offensive line can give Geno some time. I know the Patriots generally have a good defense, and we want to kind of avoid that. But, they did show out against the Bengals. But I think in terms of the defensive line, I think that the Seattle Seahawks offensive line does provide a plus matchup against the Patriots. I want to target Geno potentially, depending on who I'm starting. I'm not starting him over the obvious guys, but if I'm streaming quarterbacks or I'm switching between one or two lower end quarterbacks each week, Geno Smith might not be a bad one to target. In terms of the bad matchup, Trevor Lawrence is on this list. Now, we talked about Trevor Lawrence last week. And last week he had what I considered a good matchup against Miami, and it didn't play out that way. It's tough, man. Trevor Lawrence, it's like it's just not clicking. Something's not clicking. It's just not working out. Now, I know it's only week 1. We don't want to react, but we're going on year 4 of Trevor Lawrence, and we definitely haven't seen that generational talent that he was touted to be. We've seen kind of one good season from him in terms of passing the football. And it wasn't necessarily this amazing year. It was 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. It was good. It wasn't amazing. And so, we're going on year 4, man. We need to see something from Trevor Lawrence. Don't love this matchup against Cleveland. I'm going to be trying to avoid Cleveland all year long if I can. Their defensive line's nasty. Their defensive backs are nasty. We talked about Dak last week going against Cleveland, saying avoid this matchup if possible. And that was one of our hits, right? I'm avoiding Cleveland, even though it's in Jacksonville. I'm still trying to avoid any matchup against the Cleveland Browns. And then Baker Mayfield, probably one of the most added players this week off of waiver wires. He was QB2 last week, almost put up 30 points. That's crazy. Almost put up 30 points last week, was carving up the Commanders, right? Is that who the Buccaneers played? Was carving them up. I think this matchup for Baker in terms of the offensive defensive line is a lot worse than his. It was the Commanders last week, right? I'm not going crazy there, right? I'm just double checking if they did play the Commanders. It was the Commanders, but they play the Lions this week in week 2. And I don't like that matchup for Buccaneers offensive line versus the Lions defensive line. Lions defensive line seems to be, well, it is improved. They were pressure. They had a pressure rate of just double checking here, 35% pressure rate, whereas Tampa Bay is giving up a pressure rate at 28%. So you combine those two, and it doesn't bode well necessarily for Baker. Now, if he can get protection or if he can make plays on the move, which he's I think gonna have to do, he could still have a good game. I'm not saying completely bench him, but it's interesting with Baker because if you have him, you probably just picked him up or he was your QB2 heading into the year. Maybe you want to wait and see, and like, is this for real? Is this the real? Was it more the Commanders, or is this just who Baker is now? We'll see. I think this is a good test for him, and if he does well this week, then he's going to become kind of a weekly starter, in my opinion. Moving on to the running backs, a good matchup here we have is Jerome Ford going against the aforementioned Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, when evaluating running back matchups that are good, this is offensive line versus defensive line. That's what it is. It's offensive line versus defensive line. That's kind of what I'm evaluating here. And I really like the matchup of the Browns offensive line versus the Jacksonville Jaguars defensive line. And listen, Jerome Ford is basically the workhorse running back for Cleveland, at least as of week 1. They played him 75% of the snaps. 75% of the snaps, Jerome Ford was on the field. And I was kind of going back and looking at Nick Chubb over the last couple of years and wondering how many times he got to like 75% or more. In 2022, Nick Chubb played 75% or more of the snaps once. One time. That's it. One time. And, that's prime Nick Chubb, right? In 2021, where Nick Chubb had 1,200 yards, over 1,200 yards rushing, 0 times he played 75% of the snaps. So I am a little bit hesitant to say that Jerome Ford, this is who he is. He's going to play 75% of the snaps because we've never seen that before under Stefanski and the Browns. However, I'm still starting Jerome Ford, especially coming off a top 15 week last week at 15.9 points in half PPR. Starting him, and I love this matchup of Jerome Ford going against Jacksonville, the offensive line for the Browns. Also, I really like is Tony Pollard. I love this matchup, and Tony Pollard showed up last week. I think he had over 20 touches with 2-3 catches, 16, 17 carries or so. Was the RB11 on the week. Looked really, really good. Averaged over 5 yards a carry. And Tony Pollard is going against the New York Jets. New York Jets just got shredded by Jordan Mason. Now, I understand the 49ers overall are a better team than the Titans, but man, they gave up 100 and almost 150 yards on 28 carries. Jordan Mason averaged 5.3 yards per attempt. He was awesome. I think the way to beat the Jets generally is on the ground. You want to avoid passing against their defensive backs. So I really like this matchup as well. Not only do I think they're going to try and win this way, but I like the matchup of the Titans offensive line going against the Jets defensive line in terms of run blocking. I really, really like that matchup. So I'm going to be targeting Pollard and starting him this week, especially coming off a really, really good week. That's kind of it for the running backs. Just 2 good matchups. Really not much to say about bad matchups. I mean, Rachaad White, I don't love his matchup against that Lions defensive line, but Rachaad White, you're starting him because of what he does through the his pass catching. ETN's another one. Don't love the matchup, but I'm starting ETN because I drafted him in the 2nd round, so I kind of have to start him, at least going into week 2. To the wide receivers, good matchups here. I have Drake London. Man, I really, 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 really hope that Drake London bounces back. I like this matchup against the Eagles and Avonte Maddox and Quinyon Mitchell. Those are going to be the 2 guys he's probably going to see for the majority of the game. And I really hope that he and the Falcons do well. If not, man, we're going to be panicking. We are going to be panicking. I was a little bit skeptical of the Drake London leap to elite status, considering the guy has never been a top 36 receiver, I don't believe. in total points, or has had over 1,000 yards. I know a lot of it's due to his quarterback play, but man, where we were drafting him, he needed to take that leap to like a 1,500-yard receiver, and I was very skeptical. I think he's going to be better than this. I think this week he's going to have a good matchup. I think they're going to have to pass the ball a lot and keep up with the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think Drake London, that is, can take advantage of this matchup against Maddox or against Mitchell. So I kind of like both those matchups. I prefer him going up against Maddox than Mitchell, but I like both. I really, really do like both. Jameson Williams against Tyke Smith. I really, really like this matchup. Now, Jameson Williams came up last week. He was kind of the only Lions pass catcher to do anything. This is what we've been expecting for the last 2 years, and we finally got it. And I really love how many targets he got. That's kind of what I love the most about Jameson Williams' stat line. It wasn't necessarily the obviously I like the 100 yards and the touchdown, but the fact that he got 9 targets, that's what I love the most, because I feel a little bit more confident about starting him, and I feel even more confident about him going up against Tyke Smith. Buccaneers are full of injuries. They have a lot of injuries, and they're starting a third-round rookie, Tyke Smith, in the slot. And I think that's where Jameson Williams is going to take advantage of Tyke Smith. And so even his other matchups, I don't mind against the Buccaneers. I like the matchup he might have against Zion McCollum. I do really, really like that matchup, and I think he can do well against that. I don't love his matchup necessarily against I'm blanking on the other guy, on the other defensive back there now, but I assume he's going to be going against these two, Tyke Smith and McCollum is what we're going to see him facing. Jamel Dean. I don't love his matchup against Jamel Dean, but I don't think he's going to see much of a Jamel Dean in this game. I hope not. So yeah, Jameson Williams, fire him up, man. Fire him up after that performance, after those target share. And I think a pretty good matchup here. Khalil Shakir, he was on our list of good matchups. Khalil Shakir was last week, and it kind of hit. He scored a touchdown. He didn't do necessarily a whole lot in terms of yards and targets. I'm just double checking. 3 targets, 3 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. But we had him on a potential good matchup, good starts. And I like it again this week for him, right? They're playing the Dolphins tonight. So I like the matchup against Kader Kohu, I believe it's how you say it. I might be saying that wrong, but I think that's who he's going to match up against the most in the slot. That's the Dolphins' main slot cornerback there. And I think that's a very, very good matchup for Khalil Shakir. So I don't be surprised if Khalil Shakir has another solid game for you. I know it's a little tough to start him. If you want to wait and see, that's fine. But I do think he's going to be matched up almost the entire game off of Kohu and Kader Kohu. And I like that matchup for Khalil Shakir. One last good matchup for the wide receivers is Terry McLaurin. This is pretty easy. He's going against the Giants. Deonte Banks, Adoree Jackson doesn't really matter for me. We saw, I just think their pass defense is terrible. And McLaurin, I expect a huge bounce back game for Terry McLaurin. I think he's going to see mostly Adoree Jackson, but he could see Deonte Banks a good amount as well. I don't think it matters. I think they're going to make it a point to get him the ball because he didn't really do much in week 1. And I think he has a huge game. He always feasts against the Giants as well. So start Terry McLaurin, please. Bad matchups, Christian Kirk. Again, it's Cleveland is a big reason why. I don't love that matchup for Christian Kirk in the slot there. I'm worried about Christian Kirk overall. I just think Brian Thomas is just overtaking him. I think Christian Kirk sees a lot of Greg Newsome, and that's who you don't want to see in the slot. And so we're going to be seeing that a lot. I think majority of the snaps for Christian Kirk is going to come against Greg Newsome. And I would assume that Trevor Lawrence is just going to avoid that as much as possible. I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have a kind of another dud game for Christian Kirk, and then we're all going to be panicking. So I think I'm benching Christian Kirk. if possible. Just don't love this matchup at all for the Jacksonville Jaguars against Cleveland. So I'm kind of trying to bench all those guys. JSN, another one. We mentioned JSN as a bad matchup last week, and it hit. He has another bad matchup in the slot against Marcus Jones for the New England Patriots. Don't love that matchup. I think Jones is one of the better slot cornerbacks in the NFL, potentially. I think he is a very good player. I don't think he had necessarily a great week one, but Marcus Jones is going to play that slot for New England, and I do think he's just a very good player overall. He did have a good week one. I don't know why I said I don't think he did. He had a good week one. I really don't love this matchup for JSN, which is going to suck again because now we're going to go 2 weeks in a row of poor performances and people are going to be freaking out about JSN. Maybe a buy low candidate after this week. Calvin Ridley is my last wide receiver that I'm trying to avoid here. It's simple. He's going against Sauce Gardner, most likely. He's going to see multiple, not just Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner, at least I didn't check this last week, but Sauce Gardner, not really a guy who follows the number one receiver. I just don't love the matchup against any of the Jets cornerbacks, whether it's Sauce Gardner, Michael Carter, or DJ Reed. And so, it doesn't really matter who he's going up against. I don't love any of those matchups. I think he's going to mostly see Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. So I think I'm kind of avoiding Calvin Ridley if I can. Again, and we're going to come off back-to-back weeks of poor performances for Ridley. I think they're just going to try and beat the Jets on the ground. I think the game will be close enough to where they can consistently run the ball. I have 3 tight end matchups to talk about here before we finish up. Colby Parkinson going up against Jalen Thompson, I think is a pretty good matchup to target. A lot of people picked up Parkinson. I was talking about Parkinson all offseason saying hey, this guy's going to probably put up Tyler Higbee numbers. And Tyler Higbee numbers aren't blow you out of the water numbers, but they're good enough to be able to wait on tight end and stream tight end and just stream Colby Parkinson. And that's exactly what he did week one, Colby Parkinson. He put up Tyler Higbee numbers, 4 catches. If you give me 4 catches for 50 yards each week as a streaming tight end, I'm very, very happy. You're going to catch the occasional touchdown. And there's something to say about, Puka's hurt. Maybe a little bit more goes towards Colby Parkinson or the tight end position. Probably not, but I don't really care. If you give me 4 for 50 each week, that's fine. I like the matchup of Jalen Thompson going up against, the safety for the Arizona Cardinals going up against Parkinson. I think they can take advantage of that. I think the Cardinals in general, we didn't really see it last week with Kincaid or even James Cook necessarily in terms of being able to win over the middle of the field. I think the Cardinals have a hard time covering that middle of the field, and I think that's going to open things up for potentially for Parkinson here. Juwan Johnson is another one. Juwan Johnson, who was tight end 4 last week just by catching a touchdown, basically. But I like his matchup. I do like Juwan Johnson's matchup against Eric Kendricks of the Cowboys. You generally want to try, Cowboys have good defensive backs. So, that comes into play a little bit here. Eric Kendricks, I don't think is necessarily the greatest cover cornerback now at this point. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I do like the matchup for Juwan Johnson. Are you going to be starting him over, your main guys? No. But if you want to take a shot or you play in deeper leagues or DFS, I think Juwan Johnson could have a potentially good week this week in week 2. And then Mark Andrews, you're starting him, but I don't love the matchup for Mark Andrews. I don't love the matchup for Mark Andrews against Robert Spillane of the Raiders, who I think is actually a pretty good cover linebacker, and that's who he's probably going to be seeing the most of. Now, Mark Andrews is a special talent. You're going to be starting Mark Andrews. Just keep starting him at least for the first few weeks. I know he had a bad week 1. I know he has a bad matchup in week 2. I'm still starting him, but just wanted to point out, maybe a buy low candidate after this week. A couple other bad matchups I don't like. If you were thinking about starting Luke Schoonmaker, replacing Ferguson potentially, don't like that matchup against Tyrann Mathieu. Chiga Okonkwo, don't love that matchup for Quinnen Williams for the Jets. And then Tucker Kraft, I don't like that matchup if you were thinking about starting him against EJ Speed. So for the Colts. that's it, guys. We'll see how many of these hits. Hopefully we keep up with the 65% hit rate, because if we do, that's going to be really, really good for the year. We're going to be winning a lot of matchups. Appreciate you all. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you all in